Conscience Protection Act, a one-on-one interview with the senator pushing a bill to help healthcare workers feeling forced to perform abortions. Deadly crash. All 7 service members are killed aboard a U.S. helicopter that went down in Iraq. We have the details. Busy weekend. The Pope's plans to honor one of Italy's favorite saints. We'll talk to a Vatican expert. And Pray of the Day. A Catholic nun plays a role in one of March Madness's Cinderella teams. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, March 16, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The White House downplays reports that President Trump is making more staff changes within his administration. The president already has fired his Secretary of State, and speculation remains that his national security advisor is next to go. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. General H.R. McMaster has butted heads with the president over the Iran deal and the U.S. approach to dealing with North Korea. But White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says the two have a good working relationship and no changes are coming.
The Chief of Staff actually spoke to a number of staff this morning, reassuring them that there were personnel changes, no immediate personnel changes at this time, and that people shouldn't be concerned. We should do exactly what we do every day, and that's come to work and do the very best job that we can.
Sarah Sanders from today's White House briefing. Keep in mind, the president himself seemed to imply earlier this week after the firing of Secretary of State Rex Tillerson that he is going to shuffle his staff more. He said, quote, "We're getting very close to having the cabinet and other things that I want." Questions remain about the future of cabinet members, including Secretary of Veteran Affairs David Shulkin, after a VA Inspector General report found that Shulkin used taxpayer money to cover travel expenses for his wife to join him on a European trip. And there has even been speculation over how long the president's chief of staff, John Kelly, will remain on the job. A White House official close to the chief of staff tells me Kelly is not planning to resign.
Okay, Mark, we'll continue to follow and see if there are any more future shakeups at the White House. White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. U.S. Representative Louise Slaughter, a 16-term Democrat congresswoman from New York, is dead at the age of 88. Her office says she passed away today. Slaughter served 31 years on Capitol Hill. She was the first woman to lead the powerful House Committee on Rules. House Speaker Paul Ryan calls her a giant in the people's house. A special election will be held to fill her seat. The fate of the Conscience Protection Act now rests in the hands of the top 4 congressional leaders. Catholic bishops are among those urging lawmakers to attach that bill to a must-pass spending deal needed to keep the government open after next Friday. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvey joins us now with more. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. The Conscience Protection Act would defend healthcare workers forced by their employers to assist with abortions. This bill would give nurses, doctors, and others the right to sue. I sat down with the lead sponsor in the Senate, Republican James Lankford of Oklahoma. Senator Lankford, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Catholics were urged to call lawmakers on Monday, urging them to pass the Conscience Protection Act. Did you receive many calls?
I have received some calls, but I would encourage people to continue to be able to call. They, quite frankly, don't have to call my office. I'm already working on it, and this is a very big issue for us to be able to resolve, just basic conscience protections. Again, this is the United States of America. This shouldn't be a big issue, but it has become that. But this is the week that those decisions really have to be made.
So I'm told it's being negotiated now at the very top level. So you've got Senator Schumer, McConnell, Representative Pelosi, and Ryan. They're the ones that are making this decision. What can Republicans give to Democrats to get them to yes on the Conscience Protection Act?
You know, that's all the final negotiations now at the top level for this, because all of us have pushed it to that level to say we really want this to be in. We really want people to engage. It should be basic American freedoms to be able to protect people's right of conscience. And so our push is to all of those 4 leaders to say, as you're negotiating this, make sure that this is in the final bill.
So anything in particular, like maybe increasing spending caps, that would please the Democrats?
No, there's not any one item that I would really say becomes, if only we would trade this for this. The key issue that I continue to raise is this is both a moral, ethical issue of free speech, a freedom of association issue. This is something that should be straightforward and simple. Make sure that this is in, and just encourage Democrats who have been adamantly opposed to this to step up and say, okay, let's allow people to be able to live their freedom of conscience.
How did you get involved in on this issue? Where did you get an interest in this?
Well, this has been an interest for me for a long time. I came into the House now 7 years ago, and the 4 years I was in the House worked on issues around religious liberty and allowing people to be able to live out their conscience. We've got to engage in this to allow all Americans to be able, not only be engaged in their government, but be able to live out their values.
I know you and I both have met Nurse DiCarlo, a Catholic out of New York, who was forced to participate and assist in an abortion. As you look at negotiating power here on the Hill on this issue, I don't think any Republicans are going to vote no on the spending bill if CPA, if the Conscience Protection Act, is not included in the spending bill. So what exactly is the negotiating power here on your end?
So the biggest thing that we can have is at the very end for the 4 people that are in the final negotiations on the final list of items that are unresolved, for them to be able to loudly and clearly hear from people. This is something that's incredibly important. This is not a new issue. This is an issue that now for the past 3 years has been raised every single year, and it said this is the year this needs to be resolved. Now we're at the final table, final negotiations, final stage. It's time to make it more than final. It's time to be able to get it done.
Senator Langford tells me he thinks this is the first time the Conscience Protection Act has made it this far in the spending deal negotiations. The U.S. bishops urged Catholics to call and write their lawmakers Monday. Human Life Action tells me more than 39,000 people so far responded to that call. Wyatt?
Okay, Jason, I know you'll be following this carefully to see if it does pass. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvey. Thanks, Jason. At least 6 people are dead after a pedestrian bridge collapses in Miami.
The investigation is vital because we want to ensure that this type of accident doesn't happen again locally or anywhere in this country.
Officials say the walkway had been in use just 5 days. The cables were being tightened when it fell. It was intended for students at Florida International University to safely cross a 6-lane highway. 2 Navy pilots are killed after their fighter jet crashes near Key West, Florida. Officials say the plane wrecked as it tried to land. The pilots were James Johnson and Caleb King. Both men ejected but did not survive. All 7 service members aboard a U.S. military helicopter are killed after it crashes in Iraq. The aircraft was similar to the Black Hawk helicopters shown here. The Pentagon says the wreck is not believed to be a result of enemy fire. The choppers are used for combat, search, and rescue. Former President of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, will be prosecuted on 16 charges of corruption. The charges stem from a nearly $3 billion government arms purchase in 1999, 10 years before he was the country's leader. The 75-year-old resigned as president last month. He was ordered to do so by his political party, the African National Congress. The United Nations receives nearly $100 million in emergency pledges for Palestinians. The appeal comes after the United States slashed aid to the Palestinian territory. UN officials call the new funds an important first step, but it's at least $350 million short of what is needed. Countries providing aid include Canada and Mexico.
En cuanto al modus operandi de cómo fueran detenidas las personas.
The United Nations says Mexico used torture to get information during its investigation after 43 college students disappeared. UN officials are calling on Mexico to throw out all the evidence they obtained as a result. Investigators say students were attacked 4 years ago by local police and killed by drug gang members. Catholic leaders in Poland are joining Jewish officials to fight anti-Semitism. The bishops' conference there says anti-Jewish rhetoric is contrary to the principles of Christian love for one another. Bad feelings erupted in late January, a new Polish law criminalizing blaming the countries for Germany's Holocaust crimes. Archbishop Anthony Apparon, the head of the church in Guam, is convicted of crimes by the Vatican. He was accused of sexual abuse and financial mismanagement. The Holy See did not specify which crimes he was found guilty of committing, but they confirmed he has been removed from office and is forbidden from living in the U.S. Pacific Territory. Pope Francis will make a short trip to the Italian towns where St. Padre Pio was born and lived his life. Tomorrow, the Holy Father will mark the 50th anniversary of Padre Pio's death and the 100th anniversary of the appearance of the saint's visible stigmata. EWTN crews visited the 2 towns earlier this month. Monsignor Anthony Figueiredo is a Vatican expert. He traveled with the EWTN team. He joins us now from Rome. So, Monsignor, where exactly is the Pope heading tomorrow, and what will he be doing?
He is going first to the hometown of Padre Pio, Pietrelcina. He's going to pray at the very spot where Padre Pio first received the stigmata as a young priest in 1910. He's then going to fly to the town of San Giovanni Rotondo. He's going to visit young cancer patients at the hospital founded by St. Padre Pio. Then he's going to pray at the tomb of St. Padre Pio, and he's going to celebrate a large mass for the thousands of pilgrims who love this great saint.
You mentioned St. Padre Pio's stigmata. Tell us, what exactly is stigmata, and tell us the meaning behind him having stigmata.
Well, we were there actually last week in San Giovanni Rotondo, and the stigmata are real. They're a participation in the sufferings of Jesus Christ. But the point of the stigmata, which St. Padre Pio received in 1918 fully, his feet, his hands, his side, are always to draw people to a deeper message. They're a sign of credibility, as miracles always are. So people were drawn to Padre Pio in the confessional. He became there an apostle of listening to people and giving them a word for their lives, a word of truth and mercy that led them then to conversion and a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So the stigmata always to look for that deeper message.
It's an amazing story. As you know, Pope Francis is not the first pope to honor St. Padre Pio as an exemplary priest. Tell us who else.
Well, really, we can go right back to Pope Paul VI. The last letter that Padre Pio wrote in his lifetime, September 1968, was right after the encyclical Humanae Vitae. He wrote to Pope Paul VI and said, "I know many are against this teaching, but I want you to have courage to go ahead." St. John Paul II had a personal relationship with Padre Pio. He visited him as a young priest in 1947. Padre Pio is said to have told him, "You will one day be dressed in white. One day that cassock will be drenched in blood." And of course, Pope Benedict, he asked us in 2006, emulate this great saint because he contemplates Christ crucified. Now we have Pope Francis, his pontificate very much based on mercy, asking us, imploring us to look to Padre Pio, who announces to us the great mercy of Jesus. You know what Padre Pio would always say, "I entrust my past to the mercy of God. I entrust my future to God's providence. I only have today to live in God's love." That's a great message that St. Padre Pio offers to the world today.
It's amazing how many people St. Padre Pio has touched during his lifetime and beyond. We'll look forward to following the Pope's trip. Monsignor Anthony Figueiredo, with a Vatican Expert, thanks so much for telling us about it.
Thank you, Wyatt. St. Padre Pio, pray for us.
Coming up, dead or alive, a court has a surprising ruling for a man in Romania. And luck of the Irish. We'll discuss the life of St. Patrick ahead of his famous feast day tomorrow. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Next week, the Supreme Court is set to hear a case involving free speech and pro-life issues. The California Pregnancy Center, Informed Choices, steers women away from abortion. It is among those fighting a state mandate to include signs telling patients abortions are available for little to no cost elsewhere. Informed Choices president calls the signs a billboard for the abortion industry. The lawsuit features 135 pro-life centers in the state. Illinois holds its primary elections next week. Governor Bruce Rauner, a Republican, faces a stiff challenge from Jeannie Ives. Reports say Rauner has a 7-point lead, but the National Review, a conservative magazine, says he has alienated some of the state's conservatives. As governor, he signed bills allocating taxpayer funds for abortion and backed sanctuary state legislation in Illinois. To weigh in on Illinois primary race, we're joined by Terry Schilling, Executive Director of American Principles Project, a conservative organization committed to protecting life and religious liberty. Terry, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
We just heard, as I mentioned, National Review has endorsed Jeannie Ives for the governor of Illinois and saying that the incumbent really hasn't stepped up on some of these abortion issues and alienated some conservatives. Is this something we're seeing with other Republicans? And what does this mean, do you think?
Well, we're seeing this across the country, not widespread, but we are seeing some Republicans capitulate on these issues, and it's really concerning. However, what's really hopeful about this is that Jeannie Ives has built a campaign in just a few short months, and she's bringing the fight to Rauner. You just mentioned that she's within the margin of error, within 5 to 7 points, and that's really hopeful. This whole movement is brought up because of Bruce Rauner's betrayal of social conservatives. He signed that pro-abortion bill that forces people to go against their conscience and forces taxpayers to pay for abortions after promising that he had no social agenda. It's over the top, and I'm really glad that Jeannie Ives is stepping up to the plate to push back against Rauner. This is about the people and whether or not the people can push back and hold their elected officials accountable. And I think that she's going to have a pretty big upset next week.
Okay, so obviously that's a big governor's race. Let's also talk about the Democrats, because there are 6 running in primaries for governor. I don't want to go through all of them, but who do you think is most likely to win? And what does that mean, do you think, for the GOP?
I have a lot of friends back in Illinois. As you know, I'm originally from there, and the money's either on Kennedy or J.B. Pritzker. I think J.B. Pritzker is probably going to bring over the top. He's very radical. He's very extreme. I think that if it's Jeannie Ives versus J.B. Pritzker in the general election, we could see a Republican victory.
Interesting. There's another primary race in Illinois, since we're still on there, that could affect the pro-life movement in Congress. Democratic Representative Dan Lipinski is one of the most pro-life Democrats on Capitol Hill. We've interviewed him here on this program. He's facing a tough primary challenge. Does he have a chance to secure his seat? What do you think about his chances?
Absolutely. I would never underestimate Congressman Lipinski. Look, there was just a poll that came out last week, had him up by 2. It's much tighter than it should be. But I think it reflects the reality of a Democratic Party that is going very far to the left. You're seeing this movement within them, college campuses, with our politicians that are elected. They're getting less and less tolerant of alternative viewpoints. And the unfortunate thing is Dan Lipinski actually represents his district overall. He has a Catholic Democrat district south of Chicago. He's a great man, and he has so much integrity. You know, I was reminded yesterday that he was one of the few Democrats that are actually pro-life that defected from the Bart Stupak group of pro-life Democrats that betrayed the entire country with Obamacare. I think Lipinski will pull it out. I know that friends of ours at the Susan B. Anthony list are going out there this weekend to campaign for him, which typically they support Republicans, but because Dan Lipinski's been so good
and for so long,
exactly, he's got a solid record, and they're going out to actually help a Democrat, which is very rare for them, but it's the right thing to do, and I think they made the right call.
It'll be interesting to see how some of these races shake out. Terry Schilling, Executive Director of the American Principles Project, thanks so much for talking with us about it.
Hey, thanks for having me, Wyatt.
Gina Haspel, President Trump's nominee to lead the CIA, reportedly subject prisoners to enhanced interrogation in 2002. The tactics include waterboarding and sleep deprivation. Catholic teaching says torture is wrong. Pope John Paul II called it intrinsically evil, and the Catechism calls it contrary to respect for the person and for human dignity. For more on this story, please visit our news partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. A Romanian court rules a man legally dead, that despite his attending the trial and arguing he's alive. 63-year-old Constantine Relu was registered as deceased in 2016. He was working in Turkey in the 1990s and lost contact with his family. Turkish authorities located him this year with expired papers and deported him. He says, "I have no income, and because I'm listed as dead, I can't do anything." The court says the ruling is final. Up next, lost and found. A church missing a statue since the 1930s gets a surprise through the mail. And part of the team. Loyola Chicago pulls off an upset in the NCAA tournament. We'll tell you how a 98-year-old nun helped them get the win. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day. Traditionally, it's a time to wear green and celebrate Irish heritage. But it's also good to reflect on the real St. Patrick. He was born in the 5th century and wound up in Ireland at the age of 16. Among other things, he used the shamrock to explain the Holy Trinity. And for more on the saint, we're joined by Dr. Matthew Bunson, an EWTN senior contributor. So Matthew, St. Patrick writes in his Confession, The Story of Life, that his vocation was divine. What else can you tell us about his path to sainthood in particular?
Well, like all of the great saints, there are so many legends surrounding him that we can often lose sight of the fact that he was a saint. He was somebody who was taken as a young man to be a slave in Ireland, and in the midst of that immense hardship, of all of that suffering, what did he do? He underwent a conversion. It was as a slave that he developed his prayer life, and when he escaped, he gets back to the continent, and what does he want to do? He wants to become a priest. He answers God's call. But then what does he do? He wants to go back to Ireland. I mean, there aren't many people who want to go back to the place where they were a slave. But obedient to God's will, he went back. And the key to understanding Patrick, as you just noted in your introduction to him, I, Patrick, a poor sinner, is what he wrote in the confession. So that's like the first line that we should always bear in mind when we think about St. Patrick, like all of us.
Right, we could all relate to that. All of us are sinners.
Yeah.
You know, in America, bars are open early to celebrate. It's usually all-day drinking, quite frankly. The country hosts parades in various cities like this. It seems to get to the point almost where we're so focused on the celebrations that we lose the meaning. We lose St. Patrick's Day as a feast day, and we just sort of think about the partying. How do we get to this point in America in particular where we've got kind of so far off the real meaning, if you will?
Yeah, we can parallel in so many different ways the celebration and marking of St. Patrick's Day with the experience of the Irish in America. We go to 1737 in Boston, where a small group of what Irish Protestants first marked the day. And then we go to 1766, where for the first time there was a parade in honor of St. Patrick in the streets of New York, much as we have today. They were Irish serving in the British Army. As more and more Irish immigrants arrived in America, they marked the day very privately, very quietly. But as their numbers increased, we can see the expansion of the parades to a real civic event. Now, why is that important? It's important because this is taking place at a time when the Irish were considered trash, when they were looked down upon, they were treated very badly, especially in the colonies. The parades, marking St. Patrick's Day as a civic event, gave them an opportunity to do a couple of things. First, it marked them as participants in civil life, but it also helped them celebrate St. Patrick, their Catholicity, their Irish heritage, and to demonstrate all at the same time that they were good citizens.
And it makes sense because, like I said, now we have parades more in America than they even do in Ireland.
Yes, exactly.
St. Patrick's Day.
But as with so many other events in America, like Christmas even, secular influences have found their way in, so that today, St. Patrick's Day is virtually unrecognizable in any sense of the feast day.
Right. So then, noting all of that and noting the history here, how can we kind of get the most out of St. Patrick's Day, especially this year and the time in which we live?
Well, by remembering that this is the feast of St. Patrick, not St. Patrick's Day.
Okay.
It's an obvious thing to say, but
that's a good way to state it, Feast of St. Patrick.
Yeah, it is the Feast of St. Patrick, which means that this is an event for us to focus on the life of a saint and to read the confession, for example. Remember that this is also Lent, so be fairly moderate in how you celebrate St. Patrick's Day.
Yes,
great. Enjoy your corned beef, enjoy the sometimes green libations that go with it, but also do it in moderation, but also think about something that's related to St. Patrick. He is a patron saint of Ireland. Right. At more time than any other, we need to pray for Ireland at a time of great crisis, especially with the vote coming up for the Eighth Amendment that could liberate abortion, turn it loose on the Irish people.
Sure. Well, like you say, and the fact that it falls in Lent this year is a good reminder for us to reflect. Matthew Bunson, EWTN senior contributor, thanks so much.
Good to be with you.
A priest in New Jersey receives a suspicious package in the mail. It has no return address, so he calls the police. They examine the parcel and open it. Inside was a statue of the baby Jesus, missing for nearly 90 years. It had been stolen from Our Lady of Grace in Hoboken. The package also contained an anonymous letter saying the sender's grandfather had the statue and it was time to return it to its rightful owner. The statue will be used in the church's nativity scene next year. And finally tonight, Loyola Chicago upset Miami yesterday in the NCAA tournament, advancing to the round of 32. They had a little help from a 98-year-old nun. Sister Jean Dolores Schmidt is the team chaplain. She prays with players and coaches before the games and sends emails afterward. She's in a wheelchair with a broken hip. She'll also have a prime seat when the 11th seed Ramblers face number 3 Tennessee tomorrow. One player calls the nun the biggest Loyola fan I've ever met. And sometimes a little prayer can go a long way. Congrats also, by the way, for those of you who picked Loyola Chicago in your March Madness brackets. And that does it for us for tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.